Good afternoon. My name is Brian Reif, and I'd like to welcome you to today's exciting Activity Strong webinar, Decoding Dementia Gathering. Now I'd like to introduce Charles de Villemron, and he is going to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Brian. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Jennifer, Bryce, Kirsten, and Soden. We're so excited to have you. I'll introduce you in more length in a few seconds. But before that, I really, like Brian said, wanted to welcome everyone. This is the third annual Decoding Dementia Gathering. We started this obviously 3 years ago because of a deep interest and request from our audience to explore everything related to dementia in senior living and help people, organizations, I guess society as a whole, kind of understand what is the most innovative programs out there, what are the most innovative trends and ideas to help everyone understand how we can further and improve the lives of people living with cognitive change. So with that in mind, I also want to take a second and thank Dr. Jennifer Carson for partnering with us on this, partnering with me. Jennifer, I'm just really honored. I've looked up at you for some time about all your work that you've done for us as a whole and for people living with cognitive change, and I just can't wait for today's learning, so thank you. Our focus today is going to be about opening memory care, note the word opening, positive pathways to include dementia care and support. This is part of our Activity Strong series. So for the ones that are new, welcome. I'm so excited to have you all. Activity Strong is a platform that we started more than 4 years ago now with the sole idea of helping elevate what we believe to be the most important part of senior living, which is anything that connects activities, life enrichment, person-directed experiences across senior living, especially for people that live with cognitive change. We started this initiative in partnership with Activity Connection, NAP, and NCAP, and the idea is to help elevate senior living so that it delivers on its promise of person-directed living. Just as a quick note, as we advance through the days, I see that the chat is really busy, which is amazing. Just make sure that when you connect in the chat, that you select the drop-down menu, everyone, so that everybody can see your valuable contribution. My name is Charles, and as I said, I'm excited to be with you all for a number of reasons. One of them is to share with you, if you were not aware of the very exciting news that Link Senior was acquired and is merged into LifeLoop, which is a resident experience that combines operation and engagement for senior living. We're the leading platform, and I'm so excited to share all, the fact that, for one, nothing will change much for our clients, but two, we're really advancing to better the way senior living operates and help residents live with purpose every day. This is a little bit about me. Two things that are important about our organization is that, one, as I mentioned, we deeply are rooted in the importance of activities and life enrichment. And then the second thing, which is very, very dear and near to our heart, is this platform called Old People Are Cool, with the idea that everyone is cool, including older adults, obviously. Link Senior partnered with amazing organizations throughout the US and Canada. What we essentially do is we help elevate engagement with a combination of technology, best practices, and amazing customer service. We're very proud of the fact that our work is, quote unquote, evidence-based. And so if you have any questions about our work, please feel free to reach out to us. So the quick CU announcements that I need to do to answer proactively questions is the fact that we can all earn up to 3 NAB, NCAP, NCTRC, and or NCCDP CU credits. You can earn from 1 to 3 because there are 3 sessions. The only requirement is for you to be on and obviously fill out the survey no later than midnight on Friday, September 6th. We'll start to issue the CUs starting early next week and will be done by the end of the week. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them at webinars with an S, webinars@linksenior.com. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, so if you want to share the great content to your friends and family or listen to it afterwards, feel free to come back to our website in a few days. The recording will be there. As a note, as I mentioned, we do have the chat, but if you have a question directly for our panelists, use the Q&A as it's easier for us to manage it this way. As I mentioned, please do select everyone in the chat. And then the third one, which is one of my favorite one, is please have fun. Obviously, we're here to learn, but if we can learn with fun, that's even better. And also, thank you for what you do every single day. Our first session today is the case for inclusive dementia care and support. And so, Kirsten, I want to thank you again for coming back to our platform. Jennifer, thank you for being here. As a quick way of introduction, when I started to collaborate with Jennifer on this topic, she was kind enough to suggest 3 topics to me, and one of them being today's. And, you know, we all know that dementia inclusion is rather new for some people, is very thought-provoking. And so we might even talk about how we remove all barriers, even physical barriers like doors. And so Jennifer was kind enough to ask, would this be too much? You know, we don't want to cause friction. And I was like, well, that's probably a little bit of what we want to do with Activity Strong, is to educate for people to know what's happening and sometimes what is the best that is happening. So with that, I want to turn over to you both. Jennifer, thank you so much. I'm very excited for today. And thank you for all your work. I'll let you take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Charles. Good morning, everyone. It is fabulous to be here. I'm going to take Charles up on that offer to have some fun. So let me share my screen here and then introduce my fabulous co-host, Kirsten. And so want to make sure everyone can see my slides. How's that look?
Looks great.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer, and I'm a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Nevada, Reno. I also serve as the founding director of the Dementia Engagement, Education, and Research Program, more affectionately known as the DEAR program. But I gotta tell you, I'm super happy to be here because my professional background, which spans almost 40 years now of supporting people living with dementia, I actually got my start in activities. I was a certified therapeutic recreation specialist in practice for many years. And so it's wonderful to be back among friends. This is my tribe. So it's great to be here. And I am joined by a positive force of disruption in the universe. Kirsten, can you please say hello and introduce yourself?
It would be my pleasure. Thank you, Jennifer. What amazing company I have. My name is Kirsten Jacobs. It is always a treat to be with you all. So thank you for the opportunity again today. Thank you, Charles, as well. I work for Leading Age. We are a national association of not-for-profit and mission-driven providers of housing services and supports for older adults. So I get to support the work that you all do. And sometimes part of that support is asking challenging questions. So that's what I'm here for today. It's really a treat to be with you all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. And you are so good at asking those provocative questions that make people think. So thank you. Actually, today you're going to meet a whole host of characters who are very provocative in their curiosity. Beautiful, beautiful human beings are joining Kirsten and I today to speak on this topic of opening memory care. And we're going to start this morning by laying out a case for inclusive dementia care and support. I am not an attorney. I have no legal background. So this is going to be laying out a case gerontology style, but hopefully you'll still find this credible. So thank you. We're going to jump in. This is the case for inclusive dementia care and support. We're actually going to look at legal, clinical, and demographic arguments that really favor this notion of dementia inclusion within residential care settings. And we're even going to look at the evidence. looking at, what have researchers found to be the benefits or the detriments of locked and segregated memory care. I'm a former memory care operator. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, but I just want you all to know that a lot of people, when we're talking about opening the doors of memory care, get really worried about risk. And it's really kind of interesting because I've seen a lot of extremely risky responses to being put behind the locked doors of memory care, including this one. Now, this isn't my photo, but I have seen this. I bet a bunch of you, in fact, in the chat box, if you have seen a resident living with dementia remove a screen, open a window, and try to leave any way they can, let us know, because I don't think this is unusual. This isn't just, it is a wonderful photo, but I don't think that this is an unusual situation. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more today. But before Kirsten and I dig in, we want to thank some of our teachers on the topic of opening memory care. Our dear friend, Dr. Al Power, who's written 2 award-winning books about dementia, Dementia Beyond Drugs, Dementia Beyond Disease. Our good friend, Pat Sprigg, retired CEO of Carol Woods Retirement Community. Later today, you're going to hear from Vice President Jen Wilson from Carol Woods as she talks about their dementia inclusive philosophy and approaches that help support Carol Woods, a very large senior living provider on one campus, but very, very large provider community that is supporting the needs of people by virtue of their healthcare needs and not by virtue of their cognitive abilities. So Pat really carried that torch for many years at Carol Woods, along with Jen Wilson, who you'll hear from later today. And that's Jen right there. Al and Pat and I are actually writing a book about dementia inclusion. We want to thank Kirsten and Jen for all of your incredible contributions and all of the panelists who you're going to hear from in the last hour today, who are also champions for dementia inclusion. They have shared their stories with Al and Pat and I for our book. They're going to share their stories with each of you today. And you're going to hear really positive and practical strategies for supporting the freedom, autonomy, and self-determination of people who are living with dementia. And so, welcome. If you are new to this topic, boy, we welcome you in joining us, and happy to be here, happy that you're here. Kirsten, I do think it's important to offer that this is a critique from within. I am not an ivory tower academic. I spent almost 40 years in the world of practice providing direct support to people living with dementia, and had the honor, at the time it really was an honor, of opening the very first standalone memory care community in the state of Washington back in the 90s. And so that's the photo there on the left. And I just want to tell you one thing that sparked my curiosity about this topic. After opening the doors of this beautiful standalone memory care community, one of the residents she wanted to leave. She was a retired professor and a real spitfire, that one. She said, "Look here, what right do you have to lock me in this place? What right do you have?" And I stood there a little bit dumbfounded, because I got to be honest, at the time, I didn't know what right I had. I wasn't sure that I had the right. And today I'm going to unpack that for each of you, my journey of really learning the truth about who has the right to put somebody behind the locked doors of memory care. And here's a little preview. It ain't what you think. So, but just know that this is a critique from within. I'm not going to talk about anything today that I haven't done myself. And I think that's really important to share with each of you. Kirsten, how about you? This is a lovely photo of you.
My hair's changed just a little bit, but not that much. And I was joking with my sister the other day that I still have that shirt, so I need to work on my wardrobe. This is me and Nina. I remember a resident living in the community that one of a number of communities I worked in early on in my career. Like you, Jennifer, we actually opened up memory care. I was on a team that was working on an assisted living and residential care community, a place that was really focused on the individuals. And in our effort to do the right thing and to keep people safe and meet the moment in terms of what other offerings were in the community, we actually converted some integrated memory or assisted living into locked and segregated memory care. And then somehow I ended up on the marketing material as well. So this is part of the brochure. But all that to say, I too speak from the experience of having worked in a community and really know the heart that we all bring to this work, sort of regardless of what the setting looks like. And I do want to note, so many of you in the chat, and we'll continue to refer to this, are noting that you have experienced that image at the beginning of someone wanting to go home, right? We hear that so often, and people actually leaving communities out windows, breaking windows, try to go to McDonald's, try to get treats, all of these things. So many of you have stories to share as well. So thank you for that. And please keep doing them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's right. Kirsten and I are here not to judge memory care providers and not to judge in any way the beautiful human beings who support people living with dementia behind the locked doors of a memory care community. We were there too. You know, let me just confess right now that when I worked in healthcare in nursing homes back in the 1980s, I actually restrained people very lovingly into their wheelchairs. Okay, so my practices have evolved because I am committed to lifelong learning, right? And the reason why I'm committed is because I want to help support people living with dementia in the best possible way I can. And so I've made that commitment to continuing to learn and to evolve. And what was considered a best practice in 1980, thank goodness, is no longer a best practice, right? What was a best practice in the 90s is no longer a best. Shoot, y'all, what was probably best practice in 2010 may not be a best practice. Is because we learn, and through that accumulation of knowledge, hopefully we can improve our practices. And when we improve our practices, we support the well-being of people living with dementia. And that's what we all are here to do. And so no judgment here. Good people, evolving knowledge. Right? We're all good people. This is our knowledge, and it's evolving. And I love Maya Angelou, this quote, I did then what I knew how to do. And well, now that I know better, I do better. And so I think I've had to give myself a lot of forgiveness and grace for not knowing better. And so we just want to offer that to each of you, our commitment that this is a judgment-free zone. And Kirsten and I, and all of the other wonderful speakers that you're going to hear from today, we're all still on that journey of learning. It never ends. And as soon as you think it ends and you know all there is to know, well, I don't know, you call me up and tell me what the heck that is, because I'd like to know too. But I don't think it's possible. I think that we're just always going to continue to evolve and grow and learn and do better. And so here I'm going to just like set the stage with a question for each of you to consider, because these are questions we answer almost on a daily basis. And so it's kind of interesting to really think about this. When does a person living with dementia require a secured environment? Like, get that in your head. When does a person need that? Who should make that decision? And based on what criteria? Right? Because we know that everyone has the right to receive care and support in the least restrictive environment. And so how do we know when we are supporting a person in living in the least restrictive environment? So I'm going to invite you each to use the chat box on this one. This is an actual quote evaluation for placement in a secured environment that an ombudsman sent over to me to take a look at, and was kind of like, wow, is this sufficient, Jennifer? So I want to pose this question to each of you. This person, this resident, was moved from an assisted living neighborhood behind the doors of locked and secured memory care based on this evaluation. And so my question to each of you in the chat box, does this evaluation for placement in a secured environment seem sufficient? Why or why not? And I'm just going to pause for a moment, and we're going to eyeball some of the conversation happening, when they're a danger to themselves or others. I'm seeing this. No, lots of no, not a wander, no, not a wander, no, it's too vague, no, no. Looks like there's some consensus
Yeah.
around this idea that no, this is not sufficient. Well, you're darn right, this is not sufficient. This resident who's living with dementia actually called up an ombudsman who helped him get out, right? This is completely insufficient. But it's not just about assessment. We're gonna unpack this a little bit more, and we're gonna tell you about the laws protecting the rights of people who are living with dementia. But I hate to tell you this kind of thing that you see here on the screen, it's happening all over the country. All over the country. And I'm probably guilty of doing it myself a few decades ago. Okay, this is insufficient to actually put someone behind locked doors for the rest of their lives. The rest of their lives. So we're going to unpack this issue together. I want to give you a little teaser here. As I was doing research, I want to thank Tony Chicotel from the California Association for Nursing Home Reform, who shared a wonderful resource they developed in the state of California called Your Right to Leave Guide, right? And Tony, who works at Canner, was really one of the first people who helped me to understand some of the legal issues about memory care. And one of the cases he sent to me, this happened back in 2015, okay? And there was a dispute between a resident saying, I'm being unlawfully imprisoned in memory care, and the provider organization. And so this court went all the way to the CMS Departmental Appeals Board, right? And let me tell you what they found. They said the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, so this is the agency in charge of federal nursing home rules, held that, quote, nursing home residents may not be confined against their will, even if a power of attorney agent has consented. Okay, so a durable power of attorney is not sufficient. Otherwise, they explained, nursing facilities could be turned into prisons in which family members lock their relatives away purely for the sake of convenience. Residents of nursing facilities have rights, and those rights include the right to freedom and movement. And it doesn't say anything there about unless you have dementia. Well, CMS actually fined this provider organization $380,000. So that was equal to about $5,600 per day for every day this nursing home resident was confined against their will behind those locked doors of memory care, even with the consent of her daughter, who was a power of attorney. So just want to set that stage in case you think that Kirsten and I might be a little off base. Know that we have done our research and that what we're sharing with you has actually been supported. Right here, you can see this through CMS, and they are the agency in charge of federal nursing home rules. Okay, so just wanted to offer that. All right, so we're going to dig into this case with you now. Each of these, Kirsten and I have prepared a short a little presentation for each one of these cases about why we think it's important that we all throw our support behind this idea of opening memory care and meeting needs in inclusive settings. We're going to look at the civil rights, human rights argument. We're going to talk about how locked doors are a primary cause of distress. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oftentimes, we're going to talk about the fallacy of homogeneity. We're going to unpack that one a little bit more. The lack of evidence that there's any better outcomes in segregated dementia care. And then we're going to look at the demographic argument to say this just isn't even practical for us to continue. So for each one of these, we're then going to turn to you and ask you to reflect on this. We'll present a couple of arguments, and then we'll use the chat box and invite each of you to reflect, how well does this argument sit with you? How do your observations and experiences either support or challenge this argument? And then at the very, very end of the arguments, we want to know if any of these arguments seem compelling to you, and if so, which ones? Which ones are the most compelling and why? Okay, so that's our format for this hour together. We're going to jump in with the civil rights, human rights argument. That's right. Every human has rights, including people who are living with dementia. And so it is bizarre to me that there is still only one group of people who are, for whatever reason, compelled to live apart from others outside of convicted prisoners, and those are people who are living with dementia. But what Kirsten and I are going to share with you is that these restrictions infringe on the right to have a choice of care and care setting. Okay, choice of care and care setting, and to receive care and support in the least restrictive environment. It also infringes on each person's right to self-determination. And so, in other words, in order to explore these rights with each of you, which are upheld by the U.S. Constitution, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the U.S. Supreme Court 1999 Olmstead versus LC decision, and several federal and state laws. To share these with you, Kirsten and I are actually going to read some verbatim excerpts from recommendation number 17 in the Nevada State Plan to address Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And so the reason why we're sharing in this format is because this is a downloadable document. And so if you want to equip yourself with these arguments, know that it's just as easy as a Google search to get you to the Nevada State Plan to address Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And please know that this recommendation, when it was written back in 2022 for the 2023 plan, had unanimous support. Unanimous support. All right, we're going to alternate reading these excerpts. I'll start, Kirsten. So increasingly, locked and segregated dementia care is being challenged as a potential violation of a person's human rights and civil liberties. People living with dementia have the right to choose their own care and living environment and should remain free of forced placement. Holding a power of attorney over someone does not grant the legal authority to place an adult in a locked environment, even if that adult has a dementia-related diagnosis.
There is also no legal authority for physicians to confine residents in long-term care, and no legal authority giving long-term care providers the ability to hold a resident against their will. By law, there are only two people with the authority to consent to an individual's placement in a locked dementia care setting: the individual themselves or a court-appointed guardian.
The U.S. Constitution provides a right of privacy and guarantee that liberty interests may not be deprived without due process of law. Unfortunately, unjustly, and perhaps unwittingly, under this standard, long-term care communities across the United States may be committing, this is a legal definition, folks, false imprisonment.
While the right to move freely is well established under general legal principles, there are also federal and state laws that enhance the general rules, including the right to self-determination, the right to free choice in determining treatment, the right to refuse treatment and to be informed of the consequences of that refusal, the right to be free from restraint, the right to considerate and respectful care, and the right to be free from interference in exercising one's rights.
That's right. Furthermore, people living with dementia have the right to live and receive care and support in the least restrictive environment. The Supreme Court 1999 Olmstead decision asserts that the medically unjustifiable institutionalization of persons with disabilities, including cognitive disabilities, constitutes a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
To protect these rights, we encourage the standardization of the assessment and the admission process for all locked dementia care settings, and a comprehensive audit of the current assessment and admissions process. A comprehensive audit is necessary to better understand the prevalence of the issue of false imprisonment.
In addition, we encourage the Ombudsman's Office to raise awareness about the definition of and issues regarding unlawful confinement and false imprisonment. We further encourage the Ombudsman's Office to work collaboratively with residents who do not consent to placement to help them explore other options, ensuring each individual's right to live in the least restrictive environment.
In addition, it is the responsibility of surveyors to ensure legal and regulatory compliance regarding the requirement for consent to placement, ensuring that no individual is confined against their will unless authorized by a court-appointed guardian, and that each individual's preference for care and care setting are clearly documented and honored.
All right. So thank you, Kirsten. So those are quotes from the Nevada State Plan, something that we're working on really hard over here in the great battle-born state of Nevada. So we want to know, what do you think? I mean, how does this legal argument sit with you? So we're just going to take a moment, invite you to share your thoughts in the chat box, even if it's like, I had no idea. Know that most people didn't, neither did most of the members on the Nevada task force who approved, unanimously supported this recommendation after we had legal experts come and provide counsel. How do your observations and experiences either support or challenge this argument? So this is your opportunity to interact with this legal argument.
I see some good comments. One, boy, this is a tough one. What if someone needs care and doesn't know it? How can a person with advanced dementia make the best decision for themselves? Most of the residents I work with can't make a decision at all. I think family should have a say. I didn't know. Wasn't aware of this. Very gray area. So I see a really wide spectrum of feelings and responses, which makes so much sense.
And I saw a good question. Does this apply to a day program? And I would say, yeah, anytime there's a locked door and we're putting someone behind it, if they consent to being there, hey, then it's not an issue. It's if they do not consent to being there that, according to the law, it must there must be a valid reason for that person being there, and the only person who can make that decision, according to current law, is a court-appointed guardian, not a physician, not an administrator, not a family member. Okay, so all right, here we go. I know that's like a big bomb to drop here, but now we're gonna move on to another argument. Again, same format. I'd love to share a little bit with you, have you reflect in the chat box. This argument is about how locked doors are a primary cause of distress. And in the early days of memory care, right when I was opening one, in 1992, researchers called Namazi and Johnson investigated the importance of autonomy among 22 residents living with dementia in 2 different conditions. Same group of residents, they put them in a locked door condition and an unlocked door condition. Okay, same group of residents, 2 different settings. Each resident was observed for a total of 50 hours under each condition: locked door, unlocked door. And the researchers reported any so-called behaviors, our language has evolved, which were manifested by residents 30 minutes after encountering either a locked door or an unlocked exit door. Okay, so they're watching what's going on here. Here's what they found. In the 5 categories of what they called active, verbal, aggressive, sexual, and other responses, this is their language, there were a total of 1,503 manifested so-called behaviors under the locked door condition. That same group of residents in a different environment without a locked door, the number of reported behaviors for those 5 categories was only 412. Right? 1,500, 400. Okay. Among these manifested so-called behaviors, the locked doors precipitated 52 instances of what the researchers labeled agitated behavior. Under the unlocked door condition, there was a dramatic decline in any so-called agitated behaviors. And here's what the researchers reasoned. Okay, and I'm gonna read this, so I quote them to you. Among those who were the most eager to exit the unit, the experience usually ended when the resident was assured that the door was open and he or she could depart. Several residents held the door ajar with one hand, stepped outside, looked around, and then came back inside. This activity was repeated by residents several times during the morning trials. Once a resident's sense of curiosity was satisfied, in other words, once the resident recognized he or she was not confined within the unit and was free to go in or out, he or she often just chose to remain indoors. So in summary, and what you see on these other bullet points on the side, is that several researchers have found that the locked doors are actually a primary cause of distress among people living with dementia. Okay, that's what I mean by a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The locked doors are a leading cause of distress. All right, so again, how does this argument sit with you that locked doors are a primary cause of distress? How do your observations and experiences either support or challenge this particular argument? Do you think that that locked door is causing distress among residents? So we'll just pause and look at some of the answers in the chat box. And then Kirsten, I'll pass the mic to you whenever you are ready.
Sure. I see a lot of course, it creates distress. Absolutely. Yes, 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 yes. I remember my grandma hovering around the door a lot of the time in the memory care she lived. Yes, residents obsess over the door, how to get the code. I remember an article about a resident figuring out the code and using Morse code. I mean, there's lots of stories, right? I'm mindful of time, so let's go on to the next slide, but I'm really appreciating the sharing that I'm seeing in the chat, and I'm going to be eager to go back and learn from all the wisdom shared. So the next argument that I'm going to talk about briefly is the fallacy of homogeneity. And I think we all know that quote, if you've seen one person living with dementia, you've seen one person living with dementia. And that is because there are over 100 different diseases or injuries that can result in dementia syndrome. And we know that within that, there's a vast range of levels of ability, reserve capacity that different individuals have, lived experience, their personal stories, support, family members who support each other, and the ways in which people are supported, relationships, culture, coping style. So to think that there is one kind of living environment or approach, which is a locked and segregated memory care, is a wild thing when we know there's this immense diversity among people living with dementia. So if we go on to the next slide, we invite you to ask some questions and kind of ponder. And these, looking back again to some of our teachers and mentors and inspirations, Dr. Al Power, he invites us to ask, if we were diagnosed with dementia, would you want to live the rest of your life in a place that only has other people living with dementia? Or to think about it differently, would you ever want to live in the home for people with high blood pressure, people living with depression, the home for people of a certain race, religion, or ethnicity, the home for people who have the same GPA in, say, high school, the home for long-term care activity directors or life enrichment directors? Now, Jennifer and I note that that would be a really fun place to live. So perhaps that's not the best way to think about this, but just this idea of narrowing it based on one characteristic, right? For me, it's thinking about my lived experience and the disease that I live with, and whether or not I would want to be surrounded by only people that live with an autoimmune disease. And while I do want to seek specialized medical attention by someone who has deep understanding and experience of my diagnosis, I do not want to only be surrounded by people that are living with the same disease. So what we want to invite you to do, and I think there's such wisdom that we all carry within our own lived experience. So whether it's a diagnosis that you might live with, or the experience of care partnering for a family member, or even those of us who sit here as parents and think about our children, who I have a child that lives with ADHD. Do I want him to be in a space where only other children living with ADHD are surrounded? Thinking about his education is a great way to think about it. No, I don't think that's the amount of diversity that I want for him. So the other questions to ask are, would such a place treat you like more or less of a unique individual if you were surrounded by people with the same diagnosis? Do you think that having segregated living makes other residents and families' fear and stigma greater or less? And with that, I often think of that cycle of fear and stigma that we are all so aware of, and I know that you all deal with and navigate on a daily basis, especially if you work in an organization that offers a continuum or a constellation of levels of services and supports. We know that if I am noticing some sort of cognitive change and I'm living in independent living, am I eager to seek out support, get a diagnosis, tell my neighbors, tell the doctor or the nurse? Probably not, if I know that that diagnosis is going to lead me straight to an area of the community that is segregated from the rest of the community. So then what are the implications for you as those that work in these organizations when people are hiding their symptoms or changes, not getting the support they need, and then the sort of tattling that can happen among peers? So there's so many layers for us to think of that may be creating more challenges in your daily life than you even realize. So I encourage us all to really hold on to this question about stigma and the implications. With that, how does this question of the idea that everyone is the same sit with you, or the fallacy of homogeneity? And we invite you once again to share your comments in the chat. Thought-provoking questions. There are other, and I do appreciate this point I see Tracy made about, there are certainly lots of ways to integrate and make sure that there aren't huge barriers, right? So how can we even start to make the walls, whether literal or figurative, more permeable within our communities? How do we create more integration, even based on the current way we offer services and supports to people? So thank you for that. All right, Jennifer.
I'm just loving reading these comments. I was getting a little lost in them because they're so thoughtful. Thank you everyone for sharing. I love seeing people challenging some of these arguments, as well as people really supporting the arguments. I think this is an important conversation, and I just want to say thank you to each of you for being part of it today. So let's look at another argument. Okay, are there better outcomes? Is memory care superior? What does the research say? Well, let me tell you, folks, there ain't an evidence base for locked and segregated memory care. I am a researcher. I actually care about what the research says. And let me tell you, back in 2018, the Alzheimer's Association's dementia care practice recommendations came out. And a fabulous architect, Dr. Maggie Calkins, who really built her career on on designing therapeutic environments for people living with dementia, including memory care. I mean, she spent decades doing this kind of work, and she got curious. So look, if Dr. Calkins can get curious about the research on superior outcomes or not with memory care, I think that's an invitation for all of us to get curious too. And so Dr. Calkins did a comprehensive systematic literature review of all available research. And what I want to read to you is a quote from her peer-reviewed journal article that is in the 2018 Alzheimer's Association's Dementia Care Practice Recommendations. Quote, A recent Cochrane review, and by the way, that's a very extensive, rigorous review of all available literature. And the review suggests that there is a lack of evidence for better clinical outcomes, and other studies demonstrate an increased risk of elder-to-elder aggression or mistreatment and potentially higher antipsychotic use in segregated units. Other researchers, Van Hatsma, Lawton, and Kleben, in a well-designed and controlled study, found that there were poor outcomes for individuals who lived in the segregated living area than for a matched sample of residents who live in integrated areas. And so the conclusion that Dr. Calkins came to is that the evidence based on memory care is a mixed bag. For any study that's showing a better outcome, there is another study showing a worse outcome. Okay, there is no compelling evidence base on any better outcomes in memory care. Similarly, Orth and colleagues back in 2018 looked at 108 studies from the US and other countries and found zero evidence that special care units lead to better care. There's also, if you think about it, there's really no established standard as to what such an environment is or should be. Organizations can simply separate an area, call it special care unit, but there's no benchmark. There's no national benchmark to tell anybody what that means. In fact, there's only one feature that is nearly universal, and that is the locked door. Okay, so really no compelling evidence, right? Mixed bag at best. So how does this argument sit with you that there is no compelling evidence base for locked and segregated memory care? How do your observations and experiences either support or challenge this argument? Let's remember what Dr. Calkins said: increased resident-to-resident aggression, mistreatment, higher use of antipsychotic drugs. No better clinical outcomes. And again, this is someone who made her entire career off of building memory care. So if Maggie can reflect like this, I just love her. It really inspires me to do some more of that deep critical thinking as well. All right, Kirsten, let's move to this next argument.
Yes. The demographic argument, which you all have likely been hearing about for years and years, I feel like since I started in this field, close to 25 years ago, we've been talking about demographic change and the changing, how it's going to impact us and how are we going to respond. So we know that with the expansion or the number of older adults comes more cases of dementia. So every 3 seconds, someone in the world develops dementia. In front of you, you see the estimated growth in the number of people with dementia between 2019 and 2050. Pretty significant jump from 55 million to 139 million people living with dementia. And on the next slide, we look more specifically at nursing home communities and the number of people living with dementia in nursing home settings. And are you able to go to the next slide, Jen? There we go, perfect. So the thing that really stands out to me on this slide, and granted the data is a ways back, but I think we still see these consistent patterns, is that the vast majority of people living with dementia do not live in locked memory care. And in fact, this tells us that we're already doing integrated and inclusive support for people living with dementia. So as you can see here, there's in this information, 15,600 nursing homes. 13.4% have a separate area for people living with dementia, whether that's a unit, a wing, a neighborhood, a floor. So that's a pretty small number. So people living with dementia live everywhere. You all know this. People living with dementia live in independent living. They're down the street from you. They live in affordable housing communities, in assisted living, in integrated residential care settings. They're in your independent living communities. So we're already supporting people living with dementia in a whole bunch of different settings. And the reality is there is no way we can build enough locked and separate brick and mortar memory care to support the number of people who will be living with dementia in that chart you just saw in the years ahead. So if nothing else, we have to look around and say, oh my gosh, we're already doing this, and let's build on it and look at the ways in which we are doing it well already, and how can we do more of it so we support choice for people. They live in all these different settings, and you're already doing the work. So I think that's a big piece of this puzzle when we talk about demographics. What comes up for you all when you think about this argument, the demographic argument, that there's just too many people living with dementia to have a separate memory care for everyone?
While people are sharing in the chat box, it does make me, I mean, it's kind of curious. The DEAR program at UNR is home base of our dementia-friendly Nevada effort. And we're working really hard to help support communities in including people living with dementia, their neighbors living with dementia, as active citizens, and ensuring not the proliferation of dementia-specific programming as much as inclusive programming. Inclusive programs through parks and recreation, right? Municipal parks and rec programs, inclusive dance classes, and actually we have a dementia inclusive weekly dance class. So this dementia friendly and inclusive movement is happening all across the US. And yet we're still segregating people living with dementia in residential care. And I think residential care should be really leading that movement about dementia inclusion. And so it's really interesting, this idea that we should just keep building more separate living areas for people living with dementia.
I agree. And I see a number of comments and this comes up so often when we talk about this, that family members and community members need more education, because there is just sort of an understandable belief that locked and separate memory care is the most specialized, the most safe environment for people living with dementia. And so having a greater understanding of what's out there, what's available, and that an integrated, inclusive community can have tons of training and education on how to support people living with dementia, can have very specialized offerings, but doesn't necessarily have to be a separate space. So thank you for raising that. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, and I see, lots of people agree. We need education. Let's not just train the people who work in memory care, let's train the entire community. And you're going to hear about that from some exemplar communities later on this afternoon who are leading the way. You're going to hear from communities who used to lock and segregate people living with dementia, and then decided that is no longer aligned with their values or understanding of best practices. And they're going to share their stories about what they did to open those doors. And a big part of that is education and ensuring that everyone in a community is well known. So as you're sharing in the chat box, this is our final reflection, and then we're going to take some time for Q&A, which I'm excited to see what questions or comments people have for us, Kirsten. But of these arguments, 5 arguments that support this idea of dementia inclusion in residential care and support settings, which one seems the most compelling to you? And why? So we gave you 5 different arguments. Hopefully we offered some support for each of those arguments. But which of these arguments seems the most compelling to you? And why is that? I'd love to just see your final reflections on that question. I see civil rights. No evidence.
Multiple civil rights.
No evidence.
Locked doors. Yep. Distress.
Stress, demographics, and civil rights. Right. What some people get really anxious, and they say, gosh, Jennifer, what do you think? We're just going to open the doors and people are going to go out into the street and get hit by cars. Of course not. That's part of that demographic argument, again, is this recognition that the vast majority of people living with dementia do not, nor will they ever, receive care and support behind the locked doors of memory care. They live in the community. They don't even live in residential settings. And so there is a precedent for inclusion and successful inclusion all around us. All around us. And interestingly, memory care is usually charged at a premium, right? And so I was telling Kirsten and Jen the other day, I was like, it's interesting that the people who are most disadvantaged by this are the people with the means to pay for it. And which is interesting that there is a disparity that is to the detriment of people with money. So if you can't afford memory care, then you're probably never going to be there, but your needs will be met elsewhere. So a little food for thought. Okay. We're going to wrap up and hear your questions and comments. Let's leave you with this closing thought. The power to question, in which we're seeing here, we're so grateful to each of you. The power to question is the basis of all human progress. Let's never be content thinking that, we got this all down. This is as good as it ever can get. No, let's ask questions, provocative questions, important questions, emancipatory questions. These are questions that have to do with our human rights. Right? Human rights. So keep asking those questions and let us know what you learn. And so these are, this is just a little teaser for what's coming in the next hour. So we talked about our critique of locked and segregated memory care, offered you some arguments for why we are in support of inclusion. And then the next hour, we are going to hear from Jen Wilson at Carol Woods, a dementia inclusive community. And we are going to explore positive pathways that help support dementia inclusion. So we don't want to just leave you going, oh my gosh, what do we do? We'd love to share some ideas that have really helped support Carol Woods and other communities in the next hour. So with that, we're going to pause, see if you have any questions, comments, ideas. Maybe you have another argument that we should add to the list.
This was pretty amazing, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Kirsten, as well. I think, we have a number of questions in the Q&A, but I'll just grab the first one because, because of time, and I want to hear. We have somebody, Bonnie Jacobs, who wants to know, are we still responsible for safe discharge planning if the individual wants to leave AMA, or do we just let them go? And I don't have the context for that, but maybe you do.
It's a great question. What I believe is that most states do have something called an involuntary treatment, or you can do a temporary hold on a person legally if you have concerns for their safety, and then it triggers a review process, though. Right? Because that individual has the right to receive care and support in the least restrictive environment. Mm-hmm. And so I think each state has maybe some different laws around those kinds of involuntary holds and who can do them. But they are temporary. And what that does is it triggers legal review, right? It will trigger a legal review. And I could tell you, I've admitted many people living with dementia into my communities where I've worked with just a diagnosis of dementia. I don't even know how they got the diagnosis. A dermatologist could have given them that diagnosis for all that I know, because I never asked, how did you get that diagnosis? Really very little functional assessment. And then I thought a durable power of attorney was sufficient. It's just not.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering this. I guess in the 1 minute-ish that we have left, any final words, Kirsten or Jennifer, you want to share?
Kirsten, I pass it over to you.
Thank you. Just a lot of gratitude for your invitation and everyone that's in this virtual room today, the openness to sort of grapple with some, I think, kind of touchy, sometimes uncomfortable questions about how we do things, but also that willingness to imagine something different feels really hopeful to me. So I'm super appreciative. Both Jennifer and I have resources that we can offer at our respective organizations. Jen Wilson and I co-facilitate a shared learning series that Jennifer is a speaker for, and we'll be offering that again in February. So I'll throw that link in the chat. But there are many spaces to continue this conversation, and I think that's what we all need to be doing, is asking some big questions and reaching out to each other to imagine a different way. So thank you for this opportunity. It's really been a treat. And thank you, Jennifer, of course.
Thank you.
Jennifer and Kirsten, that's the thing that I'm probably the most grateful for today for this first session with you, is just the invitation to lean forward and just kind of explore. I can share that personally, a year ago, some of these ideas were probably, ideas that would have gone, well, I don't really know about this, but obviously I'm a fan, I'm a big fan now. And it's because you both have set opportunities for all of us to learn. So thank you again. I'll, Jennifer, if you don't mind, let me share. We'll stop the recording here, but it is also with personally deep gratitude that I want to thank you, Kirsten and Jennifer, for our first session today.